The 0-1 pitch. A liner off Nagy's glove into center field. The Florida Marlins have won the World Series.
There is nothing in baseball quite like it. Every step a player takes is taken for this moment.
I can tell you, from a professional perspective, there isn't anything that has compared with winning a world championship. And it really is indescribable to tell you what kind of emotions you go through when you win a world championship. I can really only think of one other thing that's happened in my life that was more exciting than winning a World Series, which was seeing my son Anthony born. And the first thing I thought of was, someday my son will now he'll have his dad's World Series ring when I'm long gone. And it's hard to describe. I mean, it really is. And you think of everybody else after you've come through something like this. And after we had a chance to let the dust settle and all of the emotions settle, you know, you start reflecting and thinking back on your career and thinking back to being here in Jamestown. When I came to Russ's office, I was still in college. And I went to Russ and told him how badly I wanted to be in baseball. And he kind of led me in the direction and helped me out and told me at that time that, well, if you want to get started somewhere, you know, you can work on the fields down at the stadium during the summertime. And, you know, I jumped on that in a heartbeat. And at that time, you think, well, this really isn't much of anything, but it's my first job and it's an opportunity to get involved in baseball. But boy, was it a special opportunity for me. I mean, you learn a lot about groundskeeping, too, that comes in to be invaluable later on in your career. But, you know, I started thinking about the times in the old stadium when I can remember Pat Doherty and Jim Fanning and Bob Gebhardt when they'd come into town. And we'd be sitting in Pat's office, and I don't know how many of you ever got to see the bowels of Little Commerce. But in Pat's office, it was rough stuff, you know. I mean, it was always cold and clammy, and whenever it rained, I mean, you had to have a half a dozen buckets around to catch all the leaks. But I can remember after one of our games, and Jim had to call the office in Montreal, and he was talking to John McHale, who was in his box at Olympic Stadium watching a game, and we could hear the crowd noise. And it happened to be a very exciting game, and I don't recall what it was, but I remember thinking to myself that, wow, someday I just want to be able to have a chance to get to that level. Not thinking that it would ever be a possibility. This is, as I tell people, this is a tough racket. It's a tough business to be in. It's very...
Great is baseball, the national tonic, the reviver of hope, the restorer of confidence, the sporting news.
After I left here, and that was a wonderful experience working for the Rich family. I was only there for 1 year, but it was the first year of AAA, and there was a renewed excitement and enthusiasm with baseball in Buffalo, and then from there I went back to Montreal, and that was my first major league job, and that was an incredible experience, being a traveling secretary for a major league team, and all of the things that you deal with and see with players and things that they put you through. That's probably the worst job in baseball today, is being a traveling secretary, because you're expected to do everything right And if you don't do it right, then you get chastised, and you never hear the end of the mistake that you made. And I made plenty of them, as a lot of guys do. Of course, I went to Cincinnati, and that was an absolutely, pardon me? No, I don't want to talk about March. Having spent a year with the Reds at that time when Pete was going through the gambling investigation, I had never been a part of something where there was so much attention drawn to one individual. It was probably the best learning experience I've ever had in baseball, because every day you were dealing with some type of adversity, and that was good. I mean, dealing with adversity is always a healthy thing, as long as it doesn't happen too often. And we got the word in spring training that Pete was under investigation, and took us up through August when the announcement came that he was going to be banished for life. And we were in Chicago when it happened. And I had gone out to dinner. We played a day game. I'd gone out to dinner, come back to my hotel room, and my message light was on. And it was a message from Pete. And he said, I need you to get me home. Give me a call. So I called him up, and he said, I need a plane ticket home to Cincinnati. And I said, when are you coming back? He said, I'm not. He said, it's done. And I mean, we all knew what was happening. And got him back to Cincinnati. And when we came back from Chicago, the announcement was made. I think it was a Monday morning that he had been banished for life, and that was a very sad day. I mean, it was a sad day for me personally, but you can only imagine what it was like in the city of Cincinnati, where this guy was, he was an idol, and really still is to a lot of people. And the stadium is still located on Pete Rose Way. He's from Cincinnati. And you can't go into Cincinnati and talk about Pete in a negative way, not even under the circumstances. And then Marge and I didn't see eye to eye on a lot of things, so she decided that it was time for Dan to go on to different things in life, which I accommodated her request. Went to Rochester and ran the Rochester Club for a couple of years, and that was a lot of fun. That was a tough situation. We had a lot of money problems, but we won a championship my first year there, and I never thought winning a minor league championship was pretty exciting, and I had no idea how much better it would be getting into a World Series. And then after 2 years there, Dave Dombrowski, whom I worked for in Montreal, went to Florida, called me up and asked me if I wanted to come along for the ride, and it didn't take long to leave Rochester for Miami. So
all the hoopla here, the mascots, gonna have parachuters, the whole bit.
It'll be fun. It'll really be great. And, I guess it all starts around 7 o'clock, and I'm looking forward to it. I think everybody wants to see how this is going to go. I mean, this is the only thing we have going other than the rookie league team in Kissimmee, so it'll be fun to watch and see how they do in their games, and it's a short season, and so it'll be fun. Hopefully we'll do well, but it really doesn't matter how they do. It's their first year. It doesn't matter if they win tonight or they don't. Obviously, it'd be more exciting if they do.
Now tonight's starting lineup for your Erie Steelers. Who are we seeing here? And who are the player prospects?
John Lynch, the starter, tonight's starter. Starting free safety for the Stanford Cardinal football team. Future Marlin right-hander.
That's it? So you're director of minor league operations, that's it?
Well, we don't have time to expound upon that right now.
everybody has this perception that we went out trying to buy a pennant, trying to buy ourselves into the class of the Braves. You're not going to do that. I think right now we're in the same division with the Braves, but we're not in the same class yet.
That people say, well, you know, they bought a World Series. Well, the fact of the matter is, in today's marketplace in baseball, you can't win without spending. That's a given. Because Wayne said, I'm going to give you the money to do it. Let's see if we can get it done. And we actually that year got off to a slow start, and we didn't get to where we wanted to be until our general manager, Dave Dombrowski, made 2 key acquisitions. And it's amazing, you often hear about trade deadline deals. The trading deadline is July 31st, which basically means after July 31st, in order to make an acquisition, players have to go through waivers. Before July 31st, waivers aren't necessary, so you can move players around as freely and easily as you'd like. And we made 2 deals prior to the trading deadline that year. One was Darren Dalton from the Phillies and Craig Counsell from the Rockies. And Counsell really didn't figure into being a major player, but he ended up being a very significant part of what we accomplished that year. Dalton was the guy basically who took us to the next level. And here's a guy who had a tremendous reputation as a player, as a leader. He arrived with our ball club, and the 3rd day that he was there, he sensed that the club wasn't going to get to where it needed to be unless he shook the troops up. And he had a closed-door clubhouse meeting and basically told everybody, this is a country club, and if you think you guys are going to win a World Series coming into this place every day like this is a country club, you're wrong. And the players took note, and they paid attention, and from that day forward, the whole program turned around, and consequently, he became a significant piece of the puzzle, and we went on to win the World Series. Now, since clinching a playoff spot took a little bit longer than I think most of us would have liked. We ended up clinching the spot in, of all places, my own stomping grounds in Montreal, which was pretty exciting in itself. And even when you still didn't think that the World Series could be a reality. It seemed so far away. And one of the things that you come to learn about being in, especially in baseball, where you play 162 games a year, you condition yourself over the course of a season to maintain an even keel. Because if you allow yourself to move up and down with all the peaks and valleys during the regular season, by the time you get to the All-Star break, you're going to be a basket case, because there are so many playoff spots. That all of a sudden changed in its entirety. Once you get into the playoffs, now you ride every emotion, every pitch, every inning. And that was an incredible experience. And we started in the playoffs. And Jim, I know it was tough for you. You're a Giants fan, but you know those things happen. You knew when we started out against that series in San Francisco that maybe things were going to go your way. We won Game 2 in the bottom of the 9th inning, and there was a runner on second base. Base hit to center field. Throw comes in from center field. It's a low throw. It hits the backside of the pitcher's mound. The ball bounces almost straight up. I mean, it's a play that I've really never seen happen before in baseball. And when something like that happens, you think, okay, you know, maybe there's a chance here that something's going to happen, something special. But you don't want to get too excited yet. And at that point, as I said in the video, I would not allow myself to think about getting into the World Series. It would have been too much of a letdown. I was only trying to capture the moment and enjoy the moment. We go to San Francisco, and we win Game 3. Devon White hits a grand slam home run. We sweep the series, and all we're thinking about now is going to Atlanta, and what an overwhelming task that's going to be.
In Atlanta, the chop came to a stop as Florida caught the eyes of everyone.
He's looking at you, kid.
Maddox's defense betraying him here in the first.
He's looking at you, kid.
With Fernandez done for the year, the Marlins could have gone belly up. Instead, they beat one Cy Young Award winner after another. And when Kevin Brown got sick, 22-year-old Livan Hernandez struck gold.
Got him! It's his 15th. We can only wonder if the folks in Villa Clara, Cuba, the hometown of Livan Hernandez, are aware of what's happening in South Florida right now.
Back to Atlanta for Game 6, where the Marlins went back to their ace.
Leland lets Brown know that he's finished, and Brown lets him know that he wants to continue.
He's looking at you, kid.
By Brown, scooped up by Counsell to Renteria, and it's over. It would be sweet in any case, but how much sweeter is it that Jim Leland, for the first time in a long and distinguished career as a Major League manager, is on his way to the World Series.
We win 2 out of 3. We go back to Atlanta only having to win 1 game. In Game 6, we've got Kevin Brown going, who's been our ace all year long. And he really didn't pitch that well, but he pitched well enough when he was needed to get us the win. So we win the LCS in Atlanta. Now we're going back to Miami from Atlanta. And all I can think about now is what a thrill, what joy this is going to be, being in a World Series. And I didn't think a whole lot about the Indians until they showed up in Miami. And I started looking at the lineup card.
Presenting the 1997 World Series, featuring the Cleveland Indians and the Florida Marlins.
The first 4 games were split between the Indians and the Marlins, with the 5th game at Jacobs Field. Here are some highlights from the stands.
we escaped. We escaped winning Game 5, so we go back to Miami knowing that we only have to win one game, and Kevin Brown is pitching in Game 6, so we thought if there was ever a scenario that was laid out for us to win a World Series, it was Game 6. That really made it special for me, more than anything, being involved in the postseason, being involved in the World Series, was being able to share that with friends and family. Of course, I got married 3.5 years ago. Got married a little bit late in life, but fortunately the wait was well worth it, and was able to share that with my wife and my in-laws who live down in South Florida. But I was able to share with people who have known me and been with me for a long, long time. Russ, who was our best man in our wedding, came down for Games 1 and 2, and I know how hard he's kicking himself in the rear end that he didn't come for Games 6 and 7. He was about to, but the plane fares were a little bit too high. But to have him there, Greg came down to Miami with his dad and his daughter, and
We're here. Here we are. Shooting on this with take all these pictures, you know.
To third, Williams. Game 7 tomorrow night.
The Indians had beaten Kevin Brown and the odds. Now, just one game remained.
we lose Game 6, and that night, and Joanna will tell you, I was a nervous wreck. I mean, I was in a bad mood. I mean, everything. I couldn't sleep. It was awful. I mean, it was a terrible, terrible feeling. We had Al Leiter going in Game 7, and Al hadn't pitched that well either.
Baby, Game 7, this is it. This is it, do or die, all the marbles tonight. Tonight, the Marlins take their first World Series championship home.
It was Game 7, the final stop of the journey.
What's so proudly we at the twilight's last gleam, whose broad stripes were set bright stars through the perilous sky, o'er the
score some runs in Game 7, we'd have a chance to win it. And as the video showed, we fell behind 2-0. And when it was 2-0 in the 6th, I started to prepare myself to lose. I didn't think that we were going to lose. I wasn't saying it's over, but I was trying to prepare myself for what might happen. Then Bonilla hits the home run in the 7th, and we're...
After the 7th inning stretch, and Bobby Bonilla launches one to deep right. Bonilla sends one out of here. On the first pitch in the bottom of the 7th, the previously slumbering Bobby Bonilla awakens. It's a 2-1 game.
The game remained tied 2-1 going into the bottom of the 9th inning. And here's a secret. This is how Blockbuster Video won the World Series. It hasn't been reported on yet, but here's the scoop. The scene is the bottom of the 9th, and all of a sudden, on the screen is this clip, which brings the crowd to a frenzy and ultimately results in this dramatic 9th inning, only to repeat itself in the game-winning 11th inning.
Patience. Get a pitch to hit. Mace's 1-0 pitch. The 1-1 pitch. A deep drive to right. Ramirez on the run. Makes the catch. Tagging is alone. Game 7 of the World Series is tied.
A 27-year-old infielder who got his first big league hit just 3 months prior had sent Game 7 of the World Series into the twilight zone.
We tied the game in the bottom of the 9th. I think none of us wanted to admit it to each other, but I think there was a sense that it was ours now, and nobody was going to take it away from us. And then when Rennery...
In the bottom of the 11th, both he and 67,000 fans had the same thought in mind.
Hit hard through the middle for a leadoff hit. Now Zahn bats for the first time tonight. Squares to bunt. He lines it back to the mound. Nagy's got it. Fernandez sneaks in behind, but Bonilla is able to get back.
Number 30, the second baseman,
Nagy Diaz. And Counsell punches it to the right side. Fernandez has to go through it. Bonilla will try for third. Ramirez up with it, but there's no play on it. Bonilla dives in.
So now the only choice you have is to load the bases, so that you have a force out at the plate.
It'll be up to Devon White. Nagy works to White. On the first pitch to Fernandez. He's got to come home, and it is in time to Alamo. The 0-1 pitch.
We were kids all over again. For that moment, we were kids all over again. And I'll never forget what I felt like. I don't know how many of you remember when North Carolina State won the NCAA Final Four in the early 80s. You can all remember that scene of Jim Valvano running up and down the court looking for somebody to hug. That's what you felt like. You know, once we got onto the field, it was like all you wanted to do was find somebody to hug, and you felt like a kid again. And there wasn't anything like it, and it's tough to put into words really what that felt like. It was a very special time for us. Watching the game with Dave and Frank Wren, another Jamestown, former Jamestown general manager, Tony Perez and myself, and as soon as Renneria got the base hit, we all kind of turned to each other. and hugged, and we were all screaming, "We're world champs." So I know that's the first thing that came out of my mouth. It was like when we had our boy, the first thing that I said when Anthony was born is it's screaming, "It's a boy. We won. We're world champs." It was kind of on the same level.
There's nothing in baseball quite like it. Every step a player takes is taken for this moment. And if for everything there is a season, this we know. It took the Florida Marlins just 5 to win the World Series. A man from Ohio lives a 33-year dream when a kid from South Bend scores on a hit by a shortstop from Colombia to help earn a Cuban pitcher the MVP. God bless America. God bless baseball.
Winning a world championship and the sport that you're in with the club, that's the ultimate. That's what you're here for. That's what you get paid for. And it's that competitive feeling that keeps you going.
They made South Florida proud.
Fortunate this Christmas being home to get a different perspective, or I should say a reminder that the World Series, winning a World Series, doesn't mean to some what it means to others. And for some of you in here who got Christmas cards from us, we were able to take a picture of Joanna and my son, our son Anthony, and myself with the World Series trophy. And if any of you are familiar with the World Series trophy, it's a beautiful trophy with a black marble base. It has pennant flags surrounding it, representing each team in Major League Baseball. And one of the guys that was in our wedding had come home for Christmas. He lives in Buffalo now. And he said, you know, when we got your card, my wife was looking at the card and she had this blank stare and she was somewhat perplexed. And their 10-year-old son was also looking at the picture. And his wife said to him, I don't understand something. And he said, what? And she said, well, what's their interest in birds? And he said, what are you talking about? And she said, well, why are they holding this bird cage? To which his 10-year-old son replied, Mom, don't you know that's the Heisman Trophy? So he had to explain to her that it was a World Series trophy. So, I mean, it just goes to show you that what it means to one doesn't mean necessarily the same to another.
Thanks to Dan and the family for all your memories, especially those in 1997. As a postscript to our wonderful voyage in Danny's world, 2003 saw Tony Perez, Hall of Fame, first baseman with the Cincinnati Reds in Jamestown. And he has some memories of Dan Lunetta. Not every day we get Tony Perez, the Big Red Machine, Hall of Famer here in Jamestown, New York. So welcome.
Thank you.
I am going to show this to Danny Lunetta. So Danny, as I mentioned, extended his best to you, and your paths crossed in Cincinnati, right?
Right.
And he was traveling secretary there, wasn't he?
Yeah, when I met Danny back in the 70s, Danny was traveling secretary for the Cincinnati Reds, and then after that, he turned to the front office, and he's been working then since, and they did a great job.
In the golden days of the Montreal Expos, Dan Lunetta was the traveling secretary, and one of the premier players on that team was Andre Dawson.
I experienced Dan for 1 year, and you know, an exceptional individual. And I think what we have in common is we both were Cleveland Browns fans. That's true. And you know, Dan, you know, a super individual, very good dear friend of mine, and he was in the Montreal organization, and then he was with the Marlins. And I'm not exactly sure. You did mention what he's doing right now, but yeah, but Dan is a super individual.
Earlier in the 2003 season, there was a reunion between former traveling secretary Dan Lunetta and one of the stars of the Montreal Expos during that period of time, Tim Raines, a many-time All-Star. A certain incident occurred which Tim shared with me. I should probably ask you, who was your favorite traveling secretary of all time?
Dan Lunetta.
Yeah, I'll show it to you. Well, Danny did tell me the one story that maybe we ought to share with the, just for the camera. You were flying down to Puerto Rico in a plane, and you had a long, as he tells the story, and I'll set it up for you. It was on Eastern Airlines, and it was just a long day of issues with the plane. So you finally get off on your way to Puerto Rico, and then an announcement comes back, and they tell you that they got to turn around for maintenance to go back to Miami.
Right.
And you can pick it up from there.
Well, what happened, we was on the plane for quite a while, got into the hours, and we were sure. As a matter of fact, a few guys on the team was afraid to fly on that same plane. They got off the plane and went and flew with another airline, got on another plane. But myself, you know, just wasn't really much to do on the plane, and we wasn't real sure when we were going to leave, so I just kind of started playing around, and I had never really put on a life jacket, and I called myself putting on a jacket and really didn't know how to use it, but I kind of pulled the plug, and the jacket kind of blew up and kind of stuck to my neck. And I had no clue of how to get it off, and it was so tight that it was almost choking me. And but it was just a joke that turned out to be a problem with one of the stewardesses. They were saying that, you know, you can't play around with these life jackets, you know, and they kind of got upset with me about doing it. I kind of laughed about it, and they was either talking about turning me into the FIA or something like that. But it was a weird day, and luckily I didn't kill myself messing around with that life jacket. But it was quite a comic act for the players anyway.
Well, Danny has always, I've known Danny since he was a kid, and his days as a traveling secretary with Montreal and with Cincinnati, etc., and he's always reflected back on his favorite, is Tim Raines.
Well, I was one of those guys that really enjoyed what I did. I enjoyed the game. I enjoyed playing the game. I enjoyed being around my teammates and whoever was around me. And I'm sure if anybody who knows me and has been around me for an extended period of time will probably tell you that he was probably one of the happiest guys you ever seen. And if you didn't get along with this guy, you couldn't have been a good person, because he gets along with everybody. And and Dan was one of those guys. I mean, he had one of the toughest jobs in baseball, being a traveling secretary. And you know, he had some guys on his side, and he had some guys that didn't like him for one reason or another, and it just comes with the job. But he handled it quite well.
Thank you a million. This
All right.
has been terrific. As a postscript, the December 2004 Post-Journal announced the appointment of Dan Lunetta as the Detroit Tigers Director of Minor League Operations. It also recapped for all of Dan's fans his career, including stops in Buffalo as Director of Baseball Operations for the AAA team, Montreal 1986 to 87 as the Expos Director of Team Travel, Cincinnati 1988, the Reds Director of Team Travel and Spring Training Coordinator, Rochester 1990 to 91, General Manager of the Orioles AAA team, Florida 1991 to 2001, Director of Minor League Administration, and later the Director of Baseball Administration for Montreal 2002 to 2003. To Dan, we tip our hat and we look forward to continuing stories coming from Detroit, Michigan.